And now I get to introduce the one and only Mr. Chuck Rocha. Chuck has become synonymous with Latino political strategy. I would say probably the preeminent name in the nation right now in thinking about Latino politics. I'm not going to read too much of a bio because I want Chuck to tell us his story, but I do want to encourage you all to check out Theo Birdie, which is a sort of biography, but also an account of Chuck's time serving as Bernie Sanders' senior advisor in both 2016 and 2018. Get it on Amazon. I believe it was #1 on the Latino books. It's just, it's an art, it's a science in understanding how we have seen the Latino community really find its voice and start to have this growing impact, to which I believe is going to be foundational to who determines who the next president is going to be. So with that, first of all, gracias, Chuck, for sharing this time with us. And let's start from the beginning. You are a Texan. You've been outside of Texas for a while. You're in the Beltway now, but you can take you can take the boy out of Texas, but you can't take Texas out of the boy. So let's start in Tyler, Texas, Piney Woods. Let's hear a little bit about your path, and then I'm gonna pick out more in terms of once we get to the presidential election.
Thank you so much. And thank you, all of you, all these organizations that have co-hosted this event. I couldn't think of anywhere else I would rather be on a Zoom call to kick off Hispanic Heritage Month than with my dear sister, Vicki, and this great crew of people that are in my home state, where I wish I was at, where my mama's at, where my family still lives. Victoria talks about not taking me out of Texas and living in the Beltway and still having this accent. People don't let me live it down too much. In the book, I talk about being raised by my white grandparents. My father was Mexican, and I talk about my grandmothers. My grandmothers were a reflection of who I am because it's the best of all the cultures. But my white grandmother, who lived on a 32-acre working small farm, where me and my mother becoming single when I was 5 years old, my father leaving, and my little sister who was 2 when I was 5. I say that to say we lived in a mobile home, or what some would call a trailer house, next to my grandmother's house. And my white grandmother, Evelyn Bustle, would make the best food. You know, I heard John talk about the celebration of food, and food is a central part of all of our cultures. But us Latinos, especially us Mexicans, we take our food very seriously. And my white grandmother would make the best fried chicken in an old cast iron skillet with Crisco, with hand cut potatoes that she would turn into French fries. And I can still smell that fried chicken cooking. And all of you, now that it's around lunch, should be mouth watering for a Whataburger, whatever your delight is this time of the day. But that's how my grandmother was remembered. My Mexican grandmother was Carmen Rocha, the most Mexican woman I ever knew as a child. You walk into Carmen's house, keep in mind, Carmen Rocha was my father's mother and the mother of 15 other Rocha siblings. My father was one of 15. And I could never remember walking into her house where your nose didn't burn just a little bit from earlier in the day, where she had been having a molgajete, where she was grinding the peppers like this in the rock bowl and making salsa every day, flour tortillas every day, on the phone talking to her kids, watching her grandkids every day. So I got to walk between these two cultures, which make me really good in reflecting back on me learning how to talk to Latinos, because as Victoria talks about on TV all the time, we are so different in so many of our cultures. And even within us Mexicans, we're very different between Mexicans in East Texas to South Texas to East LA to Iowa. And I think that my vision of learning politics through that multi-shaded lens of a beautiful fabric, which is quilted together to be the Latino vote, actually helps me be a better consultant. You're on mute.
I've been doing Zoom for how many months now, and I still do the Zoom mute talk. So when Hispanic Heritage Month was started, was signed into declaration, Chuck, the Latino population was less than 5%, and pretty much all in Texas, you know, some in Arizona and some in California. And today we see Latinos close to 20% nationally, and in states like Texas, soon to be the majority. So can you give us kind of the broad brushstrokes of what non-Latinos need to know? And when you're, in the Bernie campaign and looking at the national campaign now, helping folks understand below those top line differences and how you've been so effective at connecting with Latino voters.
It's a great question, and it's complicated, like our community is complicated. But if I only have a little bit of time to make sure white consultants or white folks who try to understand in a good way, in a respectful way, what they're dealing with the Latino community, I like to remind them of just a few things. One is that because of what you described of our growth, our community is just so much younger than the average American. And most importantly, so much younger than the average voter. So like the Latino average voter is 10 years younger than the average white voter. So just off of that basic timeline, we consume information differently.
Mhm.
And then you sprinkle in that some of us don't speak English. You sprinkle in that some of us don't speak Spanish. You sprinkle in that some of us are from El Salvador, or that some of us were raised as second generation Cubanos who hate everything about a certain way a dictator and socialism and communism is taught to you so much differently than an immigrant in LA who may be from Nicaragua. Like all of these things, but the commonality is that youth piece, is that we're just younger. We're just coming of age more. And every year we're coming of age more, there are more English speakers than there are Spanish mono speakers. So that at the very baseline is the biggest thing to understand. And the second thing to understand is in emerging Latino communities, which is now where the most of the growth is in North Carolina, in Iowa, in Georgia. These are second generation Americans who are Mexican Americans, whose fathers or mothers normally had immigrated there for construction jobs in Atlanta, farming jobs or poultry farm jobs in Iowa, or textile mills or farming jobs in the tobacco fields in North Carolina. These emerging markets where these young kids have grown up in schools that are dominated by white kids, you see a lot of cross culture with white identity with these kids. They still identify with like Black Lives Matter, civil unrest because they're just young and ambitious. But some of the nuances of where they're growing up is much different than the stable Florida, New Mexico, Florida, Texas, California, and New York Latinos.
Mhm. Chuck, I want to back up a couple of steps, because I think that in understanding your path, kind of most, your name was made with Bernie Sanders in 2016 and then in 2020. But for those of us that know you, that you've really blazed a different trail starting in 2010 when you founded an all minority political consulting firm inside the Beltway, bucking trends of kind of, you had your establishment shops and that was about it. Can you talk to us about that process and also the struggles that you faced in charting that path?
I think that it's the central point, like learning politics through the lens of a union worker going to work in a factory, getting involved in the union and becoming the national political director of the steelworkers, and then pivoting to starting solidarity strategies. There's things in there that I talk about in the book that is important for people to know and to see, because it exposes vulnerabilities, but it also shows that while there's not more Black and brown consultants doing this work at a high level, we see a lack of representation in everything that we do as Latinos, but there's more to that. Things that you don't know that make my journey very, very unique is I've never been to college. I don't have a college degree. And I was a single father at the age of 19, where I carried on a long tradition of babies having babies. And I took full custody of my son, who now, as Vicki knows, has two beautiful children named Rowan and Wyatt Rocha, who are known on the internet as the Rocha Boys, my grandsons. And my son now is raising those grandsons by himself, right? He's got custody of his boys. So like, these are real life things that in our community, it's just normal. But then we're supposed to be able to get our way through politics. On top of that, I had left the union, started this business, but I'm also a convicted nonviolent felon. And that is something that I have to live with on a mistake I made 10 years ago. that follows me till today. But it's also something I now freely talk about because I find it to be empowering to other people who have also made mistakes, who, like me, are trying to figure out how to overcome those mistakes. When I worked for the union, just so you know, for all of you young folks out there who didn't have the credit card like me growing up or knew anything about credit or about expense reports, if you take your company credit card and put gas in your personal truck, that's illegal. Well, guess what? If you work for a union, it can become a $400 felony. Now you could say, Chuck, that don't sound right. How could you have a $400 felony? Well, that's just the truth. And working in politics with politicians who are very risk averse, not to have any kind of anybody around them that could cause them any reflection on themselves, then you really find out who your values are. But the point that Victoria is talking about is that those are real life things that happen to me. There's more different about me than just wearing a silly cowboy hat, talking funny, and being on this important message board with a t-shirt on, which my fiance would die because she'd think I should have on a suit, but whatever, I can only be me. But it also makes me a really good consultant because when I go into a community and when I talk to politicians, I've lived these experiences. I can take you to the block in Tyler, Texas, where I was beat up by the cops and where my white friend got to take my truck home one night because we'd both been drinking, but I went to jail and he didn't. I can talk about real life experiences with criminal justice reform based off of a $400 nonviolent felony that I had to live through, that I have to wear like a scarlet letter. Like these are experiences that make me better at understanding who we are. Not anything against the woke, white, privileged crew of consultants in Washington, D.C. who are all well-intentioned. They just don't view the lens of politics like I do and had to overcome trying to break into this elite class. To the final point, that's why I started Solidarity Strategies, was that there needed to be an entryway for young Black and brown kids who came to Washington, D.C. to get experience at a top-notch firm and mentor under somebody who viewed politics through the lens of cultural competency to set the pathway to send hundreds of young people out across DC and America to take their next job after Solidarity that could actually make real change and go up the ladder to be the next level of consultants or nonprofit executives or working Capitol Hill. That's why I created Solidarity. And it was more than a firm. It's more of a firm / incubator because over 10 and a half years, we've had just over 100 young brown and Black kids come through our firm who've now went on to do other things.
Well, and Chuck, I have many of my students, both undergrads, UT undergrads, and LBJers, who have said to me, oh, who should I contact in DC? I'm going there, I don't know. You know, I send them to you, and I know that you always speak to them. Sometimes there's a synergy there. Sometimes you send them off on a path, you know, of their interest. But that is something that is so true, that you're creating community. This is also, you know, a strategy piece, but the strategy also couples with community. And you just mentioned kind of your unconventionalness, you know, that is you. That is what makes you so special. And I want to talk a little bit about these unconventional tactics on the ground. And, you know, whenever we talk, the term jiu-jitsu comes up, and I loved seeing it in the book. I was reading through it and I saw jiu-jitsu and I just started laughing about, you know, kind of that unconventionalness that comes from being outside of the beltway, but it's knowledge that is, you know, ready-made in front of us for those who are in the community. So Chuck, if you could give us a couple of those examples of how thinking outside the box is really the most direct way to connect with the Latino community.
Well, first of all, I based that off of the mistakes that I'd seen over 30 years of doing campaigns and seeing it done, I thought, the wrong way. I go back to Ann Richards' original run for governor in Texas. That's how old I am. When I was,
can you tell the Ann Richards story just briefly? We're all over 18.
I was a young union steward hosting the Labor Day picnic in East Texas because our labor council was the biggest. I was on a big flatbed trailer that I had pulled in on my dually, and I'd set up my sister's speakers where we had sang at church. And so I ran the intercom system for the Labor Day picnic. And the governor was coming to speak like she always did. She flew up, little known fact, Emmett Shepard and the AFL-CIO and Joe Gunn would fly her around in their little plane to all the breakfasts and things around Texas. So she hit them, almost all of them, in one day. She came rolling up at the Labor Day picnic. I'm running the sound system. Let me set the stage and be dramatic. But it is 115 degrees. in the middle of the summer in East Texas. To say it's hot is an understatement. I am wearing a tank top, a cowboy hat, and jeans so tight you could tell what religion I was. And I will also tell you that I had long flowing black hair that came down my shoulders about chest length. I was the Billy Ray Cyrus of East Texas. And I ran over and told my president, I'm like, John, the governor's here. Run up there and introduce her. We're ready to go with the sound system. He said, John, in his overalls, big chaw tobacco. He's like, spit, boy, you can introduce her. She knows who I am. Go up there and do it. So I run up there, excited. Hey, everybody, the governor's here. Ann Richards. Let's have a big hand for Ann. And I'm walking away to go sit down at the other end of the trailer to turn the music down and turn her microphone up. And all I hear in the microphone is, my, Chuck Rocha, I may just take you back to Austin with me. That happened, my hand to God. And I was so embarrassed. And she had such fun with that because that's all she was trying to do was embarrass me. She wasn't being serious. At least I don't think she was. She'd quit drinking at that point in her career. And that was a funny story that's in the book. But the jujitsu would be thinking about 30 years of seeing people do this the wrong way. And me and Victoria know this, that most campaigns, their Latino outreach is the last 2 weeks, early vote starts. Let's put a bunch of Latino kids in Latino neighborhoods knocking on doors. Let's take our best English language TV commercial, Google translate that into Spanish, put it on Univision. Check, we've done our Latino outreach. Yay, team. In fact, what we did with Bernie Sanders is we run a multi-layered approach where for young people, we serve them ads on their phones. And that sounds pretty unique. For old Latinas who just speak Spanish, we ran weekly newspaper ads in the weekly newspaper. But one of the biggest jujitsu things that nobody really realized was a story I tell about Nevada and about how we beat the culinary union to win that vote. Nobody buys radio during the day because they just buy drive time radio. And nobody really spends any money with Latino radio. But how many times have you went to a Holiday Inn or to a casino in Vegas and went down to the breakfast buffet and came back and interrupted your maid or cleaning person in your room? And guess what they're doing? They're pulling their sheets back and they've turned on your bedside radio and they're listening to the best Spanish music because it takes them away from this crappy job that they're having to do. And they can listen to the music because they can't put on headphones because that's illegal, but they can listen to your bedside. So guess what I did? I bought a whole bunch of daytime Spanish radio in Nevada and talked to every one of those cleaning people in all of those hotels for 6 months and only spent about $500,000 to dominate that vote as just one of the many things. But one thing is outside of the norm is why would you buy radio in the middle of the day? Nobody's listening. And guess what? It's dirt cheap. So that's just one of the things we did, coupled with postcards that we were having Latinos write in Spanish in other states and mail into people into Iowa, to what Victoria really likes the most, which is in Vegas, having a neon box truck with Bernie Sanders' picture on it, early vote dates, blaring Mexican music as it drives around the Latino neighborhoods to remind everybody that they can early vote for the Nevada caucuses. So those are a few things that are in the book.
And Chuck, I want to skip over to 2018, the midterm election, because so Latinos have the dubious honor of having the lowest turnout rates historically, of Black voters, white voters. Latinos are always third, we're behind. But in 2018, we saw a historic jump, so much so that it looks like we're on the cusp of seeing historic turnout. Talk to us about what you did, what you worked on in 2018 that really set the stage for that. Because as a little bit of context, the turnout rate was so high in the midterm, a historically low turnout for every group, that it almost rivaled turnout for Latinos during presidential elections. So tell me about that secret sauce in 2018 that you were testing out.
First of all, people should know that turnout for everybody was up, to be fair. In the off-year election, there was a big anti-Trump swell. You had Donald Trump, who literally opened up his campaign attacking Latinos. But on top of that, there's something that I hate to admit, and that is the more money you spend to go talk to people and give them more information about the election, guess what, girls and boys? They will show up to go vote. And in 18, there was a lot of Latinos that were running for Congress. There was lots of people spending money talking to Latinos. Because there wasn't a presidential election, the DCCC had hired me and a lot of other people of color to help work to elect people like Xochitl Torres Small in New Mexico, Debbie Mercosur Powell in Florida, Gil Cisneros in California.
Mhm.
Like, so you had these places where Latinos for the first time in an off year were getting communications that they normally didn't get. My point is, it's kind of reflective of where we are today with the presidential, which I'm sure we'll get to, but that if there was money being spent to have conversations with groups of voters who normally weren't talked to in an off year because they were deemed a drop-off Latino voter. And because they became more targeted and there was more money in the system because people had really been shocked that Donald Trump had won, there was more targeted communication going to that set of people in language, meaning Spanish or bilingual communication. And to my point, it's just a fact that you can't escape is when you spend a lot of money talking to a group of people, they're going to show up at a higher rate because they feel more comfortable actually voting. The last point on this is what Victoria's saying is that the Latinos are always seen as a low propensity or someone who don't always show up at the same rate. It's because of one thing and one thing only. And it's just because there's never the same amount of money spent to talk to Latinos as there is to white voters. Sure, white voters will be 65, 68% of the overall electorate. That's fine. Then give Latinos and Black people the other 40%. We can go talk to our own. But what ends up happening is there's no money spent in those neighborhoods or to turn them out or to tell them about the election. So they don't show up at near the rate as white voters, but it's only because there's no money spent to actually have the conversation. In this book, I outline that in great detail, state by state, budget item by budget item, to show that's exactly how you do it.
I know there's a hunger to get to 2020. So I'm going to start inching in that direction. We have a ton of questions, so I'm going to start getting to them. I might intersperse them from a couple of questions I still have, Chuck. But the first is from my friend Earl Bard. On Super Tuesday, I discussed that the Bloomberg and Sanders ran bicultural campaigns as opposed to the other campaigns were merely bilingual. Can you please discuss the differences? Do either of the current presidential candidates get this? And also a question, what about the Texas Senate campaigns?
So is the first question about, do the other campaigns understand the importance of bilingual communication?
Bilingual and bicultural. So are they just stuck in that bilingual phase or have they morphed over into the bicultural phase?
Donald Trump is just running attack ads in Spanish, calling Biden a socialist, and that's what he's doing day and night because he knows he's just got to build up one section of the vote who's open to him and then peel off some of the other. The Biden campaign has started doing some multicultural pieces. I just don't think that they're doing them at a high enough of scale, and there's not enough outside validation from other groups to lift him to where he should be with the number. So I was encouraged to see that he had ads that ended in 4 different types of Spanish to show that he was running them different for Cubans than Puerto Ricans than Mexicans to other folks he was talking to. So I think that they are attempting to. I don't think that they're there yet, to be honest.
All right, I've got a mega jiu-jitsu question for you, Chuck, from Joy DS, who is a fabulous reporter at KUT. And Joy asks, how can campaigns reach voters who are non-digital and in digital deserts during COVID and in the age of Zoom?
The U.S. Postal Service. So you will notice this week, I don't want to toot my own horn, but I'm good at blowing it, so I'll go for it. My super PAC is called Nuestro PAC, and I created it after Bernie Sanders, and we're the largest Latino super PAC in the United States right now, trying to help Joe Biden because I feel like other folks aren't doing a good enough job at it. Well, I announced yesterday, to your point, sister, dropping 3 million pieces of mail to every persuadable Latino and newly registered Latino in Florida, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. And to your point, that's what I was worried about. I was like, there's people not getting these TV ads. They're only running them in Spanish. There's no digital program that they should have been. Other people are doing this other digital. It was the one thing I could do to make sure everybody got the message I needed to get them, no matter where they live. I knew they had a mailbox, and just one piece wasn't going to be enough. So I'm sending 7 different pieces over 4 weeks, all to get there before early vote starts, so that I feel like I've done my part to inform them on the most information about Trump and Biden.
All right. In Texas, first Hillary Clinton in 2016 and Bernie Sanders in 2020 showed great strength with Latino voters. Why is Biden lagging, considering that if anything, this election, even more than the last, is a referendum on Trump?
Focus groups through the summer and polling would tell me, and this means my own polling, not some things that's made up on the internet, that people don't like people. Latinos don't like Donald Trump, and they're disgusted by him, and that'll be a motivation to get him to 59 or 60 every day and in every state. The problem is that Latinos don't know what Joe Biden is going to do for them, and they don't know him as a human being. Even though he's been around public service forever, they don't know him. They tell me in focus groups, yeah, he was Barack Obama's vice president, but what has he done? What's he going to do for us? He seems like a nice man. And when we tell them about the policy positions that Joe Biden have, they love it, and that's great. So all he literally has to do is go tell people what he stands for and how he's going to make their life better, and he'll do better. Hence why I've created Nuestro PAC, because I've spent $6 million doing just that, is telling people on his behalf what he's going to do to make their life better. Keep in mind, it's unfair to judge against Hillary Clinton. Latinos, especially Texas Latinos, loved Bill Clinton, loved him. And because of that, they liked Hillary. And Barack Obama was an oddity. He was a once in a generation lifetime candidate. He was black. He was articulate. He was smooth. He was nice. He was smart. He was everything you'd want to see in your boyfriend or girlfriend. And he was running for president. That's just the bottom line. They didn't. Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton didn't spend no more money than Joe Biden. Joe Biden will actually spend more money talking to Latinos than both of those. It's just getting out there early. And now you have to deliver it in a different way and a different nuance.
Bringing it back to Texas, I have one question here in the Q&A, and then I want to add in another question. Is we talked about the diversity of the Latino community, right? We differentiate along generational lines. There are Latinos for whom the border crossed them. There are Latinos who came just a couple of weeks ago, just a couple of months ago. So you have the generational differences. You have Latinos who are Black, white, Asian, you name it. You have every color, every size. So another important piece of this is the regional differences. And you alluded to this earlier with the emerging Latino areas and the traditional Latino destinations, your Texas, and within that, there's diversity of California versus Texas versus Arizona. For someone who is not from Texas, what is a Texas Latino? And then help us dig into the nuance of that.
Let me answer part of that by saying that no matter when you got here to Texas or how long you've been here in Texas, this is some free advice out there. The next time there will be an invoice attached to this advice. But there are three pieces that all pull us all together. And if I'm a politician, I live around these three pieces to try to make a connection to Latinos. One is family that I talked about. Our grandmothers, our mothers, our fathers, our uncles. Like there's just a strong family alignment with Latinos, normally led by a strong woman who is the grandmother or the mother. But that's just the norm, right? There's a strong family component. Don't get me wrong, white people like their family too. It's just different with Latinos. Second is food. The bringing together of us around food is just something that is super special. And it's something that distinguishes us in the way that we act around food and the way we consume food and we celebrate food. And the last thing is music. So if you just talk and stay in the universe of what you're doing to help somebody's family, you bring them in with food. You can't do that now with Corona. You have the right music in your ads and the right music that's exposed. Like that makes people happy. And at a time of COVID, in a time when we're dying at 3 times the rate, our children are 8 times as likely to catch this disease. Like we're looking for something upbeat. We're also looking for solutions. So I start there of the commonalities. I'm releasing a new ad on Thursday that's going to exemplify this into a big way that I may or may not have let Mr. Soto have a sneak peek of. But the other thing I would say about how do you get to them in Texas and all these multicultural, multi-regionals, like it's just hard. I'm not going to lie to you. Sure, you can serve them all the food and great music you want, but there are nuances between new Latinos and old Latinos. There are Latinos on the border who are anti-immigration and very much about law and order. And you just have to hire people from those communities who understand those communities to sometimes be the validator to help you talk to that community. Actually, that's what Joe Biden should be doing right now in Miami with Cubans. Joe Biden should go down there, put his foot down, but then have an echo chamber of other Cubans talking about what his stances are and talk about this president being the real dictator.
Okay. I was getting to Florida and you took me there, because this has been dominating the headlines, I would say in the past, 7 to 10 days, Chuck, which is officially the alarm bells have been going off. I've said it, the Democrats' hair should be on fire. What is happening with, the poll numbers that just feel soft? Yes, Biden still has that traditional Democratic advantage, but it doesn't have that strength, that enthusiasm, and that same magnitude that Democratic candidates have in the past. And nowhere is this more evident than in Florida. So we know, for foreign policy purposes, Cuban Americans have always trended toward the Republican Party. We could, if we want to, historically pin it pretty much on the Bay of Pigs, other reasons, but that is a lock for the Republican candidate. Right now, we know that Trump has, well over a third of the Cuban vote. But there had always been, a third of the Cuban vote that was open, especially the second, third generation Cubans. And most recently, the Puerto Rican migration from the island in the last several years as a result of multiple hurricanes and the economic instability. So Florida has this kind of quasi new electorate in terms of Puerto Ricans, younger Cubans who are persuadable. So to say that, let's give up on Florida, it's all Republican because it's all Cuban, is a gross overgeneralization. So what is going on in Florida, and what needs to be done in Florida? Especially now that there's $100 million going to Florida?
Yeah. My eye will twitch. Anyway, let me give you the answers of why we're at where we're at today in Florida with the Latino vote. Some pretty basic things here from a general strategist, which is what I am. You only get to make a first impression once. And so it starts with Donald Trump going up on TV in Spanish for 4 weeks in Florida while Joe Biden was dark. So if you spend $1 million, remember what I said, boys and girls, about spending money to move voters? Keep in mind that at the beginning of the year, Donald Trump is still underperforming his support with Cubans from 2018, the election that Victoria was talking about, by 8 points. So he's 8 points less than what he was at the end of 18. But then he goes up on TV right after the primaries, starting in June. And I'm tracking all of this. So this is not like something I thought of. I'm actually tracking this because I'm buying TV where Joe Biden is not trying to help him. So he's dark in Florida for 4 weeks while Trump is up on Spanish language. Now he ends up going up later, and going up so big because somebody was over there who woke up and like, we should probably get up on TV because Trump is whooping our butt. And so what happens is he goes up with these big buys, and now he's caught up with Trump, and that's cool. And that's great that he's caught up. But that little bit of a lag, and then you have no alternative messaging, that coupled with what people don't really like me to say because the truth hurts them sometimes, is that after the primary was over, leading up to that June and July Spanish buy, he was on TV every night talking how he was going to fix the coronavirus. Now that is ludicrous to many of y'all, and many of you with master's degrees who are smarter than everybody else wonder why people would believe it. But if you're not tuned in and you're working 2 jobs and you live in Miami and you're watching Univision or Telemundo every night to get your information, he's on TV. And there's nobody on the TV saying anything to contradict what he's saying. And they sure ain't tuned into CNN and MSNBC every night like I am. They're just, and they don't have to win all of the vote. That's just the 5, 6, 8 point slip that I'm describing is literally what happened. And then the last point is, in Florida, you have all of these organizations now that Biden has caught up to Trump in spending on talking to Latinos that have put $500 million into talking to white voters, while the same super PACs like mine have only raised $5 million. So you have an additional $500 million going to persuade white people to be more supportive of you and turn out, while there's just a minuscule little bit of a budget allocated for Latinos, but we expect them to turn out at the same rate and support at the same rate that they did for Hillary Clinton when there's no investment to go ask them. I will not sit by and let the media or somebody else blame our community for not showing up at the same rate because we don't like politics, when you're giving other people money to go talk to other people and not even coming to our community. That's the part that really, really frustrates me. If you can't tell me getting worked up, that's why I took my hat off, because I'm starting to sweat.
So Chuck, this morning I get an email from NALEO, the National Association of Latino Elected Officials, which it confirms a number you and I know, but is nonetheless disturbing, that less than half of registered Latino voters have been contacted by a campaign.
So that's the inside scoop here, ladies and gentlemen, is that I saw that immediately, and it was sent that immediately when it was over. And if I'd have had any hair left, I would have pulled it out. But that's the reason that the Westro PAC took $2 million that I was going to put behind the world's greatest TV commercial on Thursday and bought 3 million pieces of mail and sent it to every Latino in the state, because I shouldn't be the one having to do this. But that's why I'm sending them that mail, Victoria, is because I don't think anybody else has sent them a mail piece. And to the sister's question about the internet desert, those folks ain't online. They ain't spending all day looking at political advertisements. They're trying to figure out how they're going to live in the age of Corona. Like that's that's why I did the mail. It was the single biggest reason, because it freaked me out.
I want to dig into the Puerto Rican electorate, because I think this is really a key piece to understand Florida and ultimately understand the 2020 election, and also because it's one of my all-time favorite jiu-jitsu stories. So, and I think it's illustrative of the Puerto Rican electorate and how Puerto Ricans naturally lean toward the Democratic Party, but it's about mobilization. So Chuck, would you share the Darren Soto story?
Oh, yes. I was like, where's she going with this? Did I tell a story? Oh yeah, Darren Soto for sure. Darren Soto is the congressman from Orlando. When he was running in an open primary back in the day, I knew that all these Puerto Ricans had moved to Orlando in a huge wave all at one time. And I knew that all the outside groups that were working in it were sending mail and doing English TV commercials. And I was again trying to think of that thing that nobody was thinking of. And what I figured out is if you move from an island that you never really wanted to leave, that you were kind of forced to leave. And because again, I'm tied to the community like many of us, you're living with your cousin or your uncle, and you're not that happy about having to live with people. You feel like a freeloader and you're just trying to figure out how to make ends meet. And you know what makes you feel good? Remember what I said about your family? Remember what I said about the food? The music. Well, guess what hadn't kept pace with the growth in Orlando over time is Puerto Rican music, which we all know is different than Mexican music and different from Cuban music. So there wasn't any real big Puerto Rican stations playing the music from the island. But any of you know who are like me and likes listening to some music while you're working out or jogging or just trying to get away, you can go to Pandora or Spotify and create a whole station around the music that you love from the island. So what I did was I bought a whole bunch of Pandora radio and served it to Latinos listening to Puerto Rican music in this race, and only in the areas where that phone was registered within the congressional district, and bought a couple hundred. I owned Pandora for a month down there, just serving these ads to these people. And it was funny because Darren told me after the race, he said that he would have his canvassers come in at night talking about how they loved the radio commercials, and he knew they weren't his, and he couldn't figure out who was smart enough to do it. Now, it was me and my team. I take a lot of credit for that. But the pridefulness of understanding the electorate, people would say, Chuck, what was the motivating factor behind the issue set that you put together? And what was the matrix that you used to figure out which people were cared about what issue? And I'm like, look, woke white folk consultants, let me explain. I just went and asked them, and I reminded them that they're Puerto Rican and that Darren Soto was Puerto Rican. I didn't complicate it. I didn't talk about an issue. I was like, yo, we can put one of our own in Congress. I'm Puerto Rican. I'm voting for Darren Soto. Darren Soto's Puerto Rican. And we can put the first Puerto Rican Democrat into the Congress from our community today to fight back against all the Republican trash that they've been trying to do to our island. That was my commercial. Don't overthink this, boys and girls. Making the ask is about 75% of getting the vote. because nobody else is making the ask. Chuck, how can Donald Trump be getting 40%, 35% of the vote? Because he is just dumb enough to ask everybody for it and be happy to get 5 extra points.
You heard it there. The infamous Darren Soto Pandora story. I have a question here from my students. So just before this session, I had my Latino Policy Development Seminar, and Juani asks, point blank, how concerned are you for November? What messaging will work best nationally for Biden?
I'm worried about November because as the national polls, if they ever get under 5 or 6, that means that they get close enough for the Republicans to pull their own jujitsu and steal the election through voter suppression, through crazy things with vote by mail. And I'm not trying to set up any conspiracy theories here, girls and boys. I would remind you that Hillary Clinton, who was the least popular politician in the history of American politics, got 3 million more votes than Donald Trump, and he's still the president. So just having a couple vote lead in the national polls will not be enough. When it gets below 7, which it is right now, you should be concerned state by state. What issues are working? Again, I don't worry as much about issues. I worry about making the ask. But if you want to know what the national focus groups that I've been doing have said about issues around Latino specific, it was healthcare throughout the whole primary when it was Bernie Sanders, and they loved the Medicare for all. They loved the minimum wage being raised. They loved college affordability and the Green New Deal. As we've gotten into the pandemic, man, it is Corona all the time. Because guess who are these essential workers catching this damn disease? It's our people. Guess who's dying from it? It's our people. Guess whose kids are catching it? It's our people. So now we're worried about catching a disease. We're worried about feeding our family. If we come from a mixed status family, we're not even getting any relief from the government. We are taking the brunt of this disease and the inactions of Donald Trump. So the first mail piece, again, it ain't all about issues. I'm making the ask and then connecting that ask actually to that issue. So I put Christine, the sister who spoke at the DNC, whose father got killed because Donald Trump told him it was cool to go outside. So he went to a karaoke bar and caught Corona and died. Like, I tell that story to all Latinos, and it's the first mail piece that I send out, is that we can't trust our own president around the facts of a disease. He's not going to make it any better. So that's the driving force that I'm using over and over again, is this accountability on the Corona.
So Chuck, as we wind down and adding on to this question about what does November look like, Texas has a whole lot of electoral votes. And for the longest time, Texas has been out of reach. It's deep red. There's been some movement, but I want to get from you your sense of, are we really going purplish, or is it just wishful thinking? Where do you think Texas stands on the color-coded map?
Look, I worked for the last Democrat who got elected statewide in that state. I remember when it was blue, right? And it breaks my heart to tell you that it's not blue yet. And I don't honestly think that it's purple yet. I think it's close to purple. I think there will be more Latinos who have ever voted in the history of politics in Texas this election. But I think there'll be more racist white people who live outside of the town where I grew up that'll vote just as well. I think the only thing missing in Texas to make it purple is the same investment that was put into California when it turned purple to blue. And it was $40 million around the English only proposition, when they spent a ton of money registering and educating Latinos around the English only Pete Wilson bill that turned California blue, and then turned their House and Senate into supermajorities for Democrats because of that investment into Latinos. There's never been that investment in Texas in the Latino community. And if you're watching me, we're going to continue to inch up. We're going to continue to become more blue, just because of pure demographic growth and a little increase every year because there's more of us. This could be jumping bigger and bigger, where Texas is out of hand. If there was more asks made to tell young brown kids why they should vote Democrat and what that's going to do to make their life better.
So a question here from Michael Martinez. Would you agree that more money needs to be spent with Latino campaign workers, strategists, and operatives directly, as opposed to just hiring establishment consultants to work within our communities? Assuming the answer is yes, it's yes, Michael. Are there enough Latinos in the business And have you seen a concerted effort to hire them and also recruit them aside from solidarity strategies?
Nope, there's no, I'm the biggest Brown consulting firm in DC, and there's probably two other ones who kind of do what I do. There's a new Latina male firm that I'm super pumped about because she's now the only other male consultant, male being MAIL,
Hi.
consultant, and we're the only Latino phone consulting firm. So no, the bottom line is there's just not enough of us, and let's be clear that that I've run 2 presidential campaigns. I'm a contributor to the New York Times. I get to be on TV all the time with Victoria. Like, I am supposedly a big deal that knows what I'm doing. And I have never in my life worked on a Senate race. I've never in my life worked on a top 30 congressional race. I've never in my life worked on a governor's campaign. You know why? That is an institutional hierarchy of establishment consultants that nobody's allowed into, and they all take care of themselves. There's not one brown or black owned consulting firm working on any Senate race in America today. And that is disgusting because there are 9 people of color running. But the party says you have to hire these consultants if you want our support, or you can just go away. That's the way the game is still played. And if I can't get hired and I'm supposed to be the one who just wrote a book and who's a success, think about that young Latina or that young black man who's starting a firm who wants to get a race to work on. If I can't, and I've never gotten any of that work, then how is this ever supposed to change?
Chuck, to finish out the conversation, I want to get your consejos, your advice for folks. I know in the book you talk a lot about your experiences on the campaign in the last 4 years, from 2016 to 2020. But in terms of what working on a presidential campaign brought together with your years in political organizing, kind of what is one aha that you have come to in the last several years and that you want to pass along to folks tuning in and perhaps to that next generation of consultants, of minority consultants?
I just explained to you my frustrations of not working on Senate races or governor's races because I'm not in the club. But I have had a glorious career, and I have figured out just how to hustle enough to get the work. And you know how I did it? I went and started with the Latino group. So I consult to Unidos and to Naleo and to Voto Latino. And I have my own super PAC. So I went and found people that looked like me to say, hey, I know you have some white consultants working for you, but would you give me an opportunity to try to break in? Like, and then I built that. And then Bernie Sanders hired me, and the unions hired me, and VoteVet. So like, there's a way to do this, and I'll end up getting that work at some level. So my point to you would be that you can do this. And the people that are on this call have all got degrees and connections that I never had. I was just a rabid fighter who never got up, never gave up, and gets up early and works late, who luckily my grown kids gone. I live alone. I don't have my family's older now. Like, I can see my grandkids. And so I work all the time, but I do that for you. I do that for all of you so that I can bring people into solidarity to open up those lines. This is changing. It's just not changing fast enough. And I have made lots of mistakes, and I've got a loud mouth, and I make a lot of people mad because I call them out. And I just know that should make more opportunities for the other people. I'm willing to take those bullets to allow somebody else to come in behind me to get that work. And I think that's what's really got to happen. And no matter what you think you've done, no matter if you think that junior college degree is not enough, I wanted my book to show you that a has-been Mexican redneck, single father, convicted felon, never went to college, got to write a book, run a presidential campaign, live in $1 million home in DC that's as big as a bread box. Like, if I can do that, then anybody should be able to do that, and to show that you can do that, and that I will know I'm a success when there's 7 or 8 other firms that look just like mine.
Chuck, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for this time together, for your voice, for your advocacy. You've been an advocate of mine. You've been an advocate of my students. I thank you all for joining us today. We will be posting this interview online within the next day or two. I encourage you, I saw Esteban, a former student of mine, who said he just got the book at Book People. Please do. It is a fun read, but more than that, super informative and gives you a behind the scenes look at campaigns and the art and the science that comes into effectively targeting the Latino community. With that, my friend, next time I see you, I'll get you some Whataburger. Sorry we couldn't do it in person. This time around, thank you all. Hasta luego. Bye-bye.
Thank you.